In this lecture, I plan to introduce the worship of pagans in the Roman world from, say, the 1st century AD into the 4th century AD. And we'll be looking at two different types of sources of evidence. One will be the literary evidence, well-known texts, and the other is going to be all sorts of things like archaeology, temples, coins, and inscriptions. And together we can get a kind of composite idea of how pagans viewed the divine world and how they communicated with their gods. Now, there are enormous amount of differences among cities and peoples within the Roman Empire. You have to remember the Roman Empire comprised perhaps a fifth of the world's population at the time. It included very diverse populations from Britain all the way to Egypt. And so there are numerous variations in gods and types of rituals. But there are some givens, some axioms that tied all this pagan worship together. And I want to look at that and give you some sort of impression of what it was like to worship as a pagan in the time of the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. Foremost are the temples and sanctuaries. That's what we must look at to begin this lecture. And contrary to our notion of churches or synagogues or mosques, temples in the pagan world are homes of the gods. This is quite different from our notion of sacred buildings, which are built for communal or congregational worship. Now, actually, all a sanctuary needs in the Roman world is a temnos wall, that is a surrounding wall that blocks out the mundane world, and an altar to which you can offer sacrifice to the divinity. The temple is an addition. It's the home of the god. It's where the various objects of the god are stored. For instance, there could be what is known as the cosmos. That's the fancy dress that you put on the cult statue when you preside, when you take the statue out in procession. There are various gifts. Many of these are so-called votive offerings. These are thanks offerings given by pilgrims and worshipers. You've promised, you've made a vota, that is a promise to reward the god for some sort of prayer. The god has delivered. You leave the votive offering in the temple treasury. The temples in the Roman world actually begin to acquire more and more of the look of either a Greek temple in the east or a Roman-style temple in the west. And there is a certain convergence of these architectural styles so that by the year 200, most sanctuaries, both in cities and outside of cities, presented a generally uniform look. Let's take an example from the city of Adzanis. Adzanis is a city today in northwestern Turkey. It's not visited much. It's off the beaten tourist track. It's the modern town, or really village, of Şavdahizar. The city of Adzanis in the High Imperial Age may have been 30,000 strong. The current village, which is along the ancient river, the Penkalis, is perhaps less than 4,000. Many of the younger people are immigrating to Ankara. Adzanis provides a very, very good example of what I'm talking about. For instance, Adzanis has a magnificent temple to Zeus and to his mom Rhea. It's situated on a hill. It's a composite Greco-Roman temple built in the time of Hadrian, that is in the 2nd century AD. But around it is the temnos wall, and before it is the altar. Now, in some ways, Adzanis is a bit different. It doesn't have the usual features of a Greek temple because the cult was originally Anatolian, that it was native. It's a weather god of the region associated with the Hittite god Teshep, who's been identified with Zeus. And what the citizens of Adzanis did is they claimed to be a Greek-style temple or sanctuary, and they claimed actually to be a Greek city. And several prominent citizens went to the Emperor Hadrian and petitioned that they be admitted in an outfit known as the Panhellenion, that is the All-Greek League. And if you could get your city and your major sanctuary in there, you got all sorts of benefits. For instance, you could put on games that were Olympic in scope, certain types of athletic competitions, musical contests, literary performances. It meant you attracted a much wider audience. Many more pilgrims came to see these events. And above all, you got the imperial approval that you were a major sanctuary in the Greek world. In this case, the citizens of Adzanis convinced Hadrian that Zeus, when he was rescued by his mother Rhea as a child, she substituted a stone for the child Zeus when Kronos just consumed all of his children, that Zeus was taken to a cave near Itzanos, and in that cave he grew up and eventually overthrew his father Kronos and established the rule of the Olympians. Well, at Itzanos, the temple today, which was rebuilt in the reign of Hadrian, has a temple dedicated both to Rhea and to Zeus, who probably are simply nothing more than Hellenized Anatolian god and goddess. There is built underneath the temple a subterranean chamber, which apparently represents the original cave where Zeus was nursed. Coins and inscriptions refer to the various events of the myth, and Itzanos took off. It had major building programs, not only of the temple, but also a stadium and theater, various bath complexes. All of these are going to be important for the worship. So the temple is the all-important focus. It's a major monument in the city, but it's not our idea of a place to go to pray, to worship, as you would say in a church or in a mosque. This is also borne out in Roman temples. That is, temples that follow the Roman architectural tradition rather than the Greek. For instance, in North Africa, at a town called Thamgoudi, better known by its modern name Timjad in Algeria, it was a Roman veteran colony, they set up a virtual mini Rome with a major temple to Jupiter Capitolinus, which is the Jupiter in the city of Rome today. However, that type of architecture was not confined just to the Roman colonies, that is, Roman veterans, Roman citizens who know how to build this, but was adopted by the local population. In Africa, the port city of Tipasa, a Punic city, there are no Romans living there, they essentially adopted the same plan. They set up Roman temples, public baths, axial streets, all of these public buildings in direct imitation to the Roman colony, which is some distance from their city. And many numerous lesser cities in Africa did the same. At Baalbek, Heliopolis, today in Lebanon, there's a construction of a whole series of Baroque temples to Jupiter, Zeus, and Bacchus, which are just thinly disguised versions of the Phoenician gods. And so there is a move to present your temples and your sanctuaries either in a Roman or Greek style, because that's the high architecture. That's the architecture of the emperors. That is the architecture of success, and you want to update the sanctuaries of your gods and goddesses so that they are both Roman or Greek in style. And that is one of the most important points you need to make in pagan religious change in the Roman Empire, and that is the Romanization of sacred space in the Western provinces, the Hellenization, that is the Greek-style temples in the eastern provinces. And Itzanos is an excellent example of the former, the city of the latter, that is the Hellenization. And for the former, we have numerous examples in Africa, in Spain, and in Gaul. Now, these temples are only part of the whole package of pagan worship. And they, as I said, they are the home of the city gods. You were required to have other types of monuments in your city, colonnaded streets, other types of buildings. We'll get into that in a moment. Above all, theaters. Theaters are originally an assembly point for religious worship or political meetings. They are not built specifically for putting on drama. That's something the Athenians come up with in the 6th and 5th century BC. And the majority of early Greek theaters probably had no drama whatsoever. They're essentially gathering places for the faithful, that is, the citizen body. Now that gets us to the second point about paganism. You need all of these monuments. You need the home of the gods, you need the theater, you need the streets, because the real worship of the gods involves rituals and processions. These would be presided over by the elite members of the society. In cities, these would be called decurions in Roman law. That is the so-called local elites who had a certain property qualifications so they could undertake the expensive festivals. Senators and equestrians, that is the imperial elite in Rome and in Italy, they would put on many of these festivals. And of course, the greatest patrons of all would be the imperial family. We can get an idea of what these processions are like from the city of Ephesus, which is probably well known to many of you if you've traveled to Turkey, Asia Minor. Ephesus is one of the largest cities in the Mediterranean world. It's extremely well preserved. And we have not only the archaeology, the well-excavated site, we have a description of the procession from a novelist called Xenophon of Ephesus, writing probably in the 2nd century A.D., and it's one of these fantastic romances where the most beautiful boy in the world meets the most beautiful girl in the world, Habrocomes and Antheia, and they meet at the festival, they're in the procession, they're whisked away by pirates, and they go through a series of fantastic misadventures in which the virtue of the girl is always threatened, but she preserves it, and the boy, well, he succumbs, the usual double standard, and they eventually rejoin each other and are married at Ephesus and again in the festival. And if you know Ephesus, the city, very well, the main sanctuary, the Artemisium, the sanctuary to Artemis Ephesia, is outside the city. And what would happen on the high holidays, it's described in the novel, and it's described in inscriptions, it's depicted on the city's coins. You took the cult statue all decked out in its cosmos, its various ornaments, costume, and the statue would be moved along in a sacred cart drawn by stags, apparently, and it would enter through the Magnesia, or east gate of the city, at the upper agora. And then from the upper agora, it would wind its way around the various districts of the city and end up at the theater, where the cult statue would be placed, where sacrifices would be offered, and the goddess would make an epiphany, an appearance. That is, the statue would become the receptacle for receiving the divinity. This is a very old concept. It's also seen in the Near East and in ancient Egypt. It characterizes all pagan worship. That is, there is a public procession and ritual that brings the cult statue to the theater where the prayers are offered with sacrifices. You must have the proper sacrifice and prayer. Again, as I referred to this pagan writer Cilistius, writing in the 4th century, his comment is, prayers divorced of sacrifices are only words. Prayers with sacrifices are animated words. The words giving power to life and the animation to the word, meaning that with the sacrifices, the goddess will just soak up that smoke and come and appear to her worshipers. There are numerous inscriptions that report these sacrifices. And above all, the distributions are gifts given out at that time. Now, in the case of Ephesus, there would be over 25,000 people packed into that theater. They would get distributions, not so much the sacred meat, but money, perfume bottles for women, grain. And we have a remarkable inscription and coins issued by the city of Stratonicea, or Stratonicea, as you anglicize it, in Turkey today. And that inscription reports a distribution which would have been common through the whole Roman world. And let me read that text. It comes from an inscription, and this is my own translation of it. It's in Greek. And the two leading members of this festival are a husband-wife team, Tiberius Claudius Aristeus Maeander and his wife Aelia Glycina, who are obviously local worthies in the social registry of the city of Stratonicea. And they tell a great deal about how noble they are, and then they explain. They, that is the couple, instituted a festival for the entire city, and they carefully gave to each of the citizens assembled in the theater 2 denarii apiece. That is, there's been the procession of the cult statue, in this case the goddess Hecate, who's a witch goddess. She's always accompanied by 2 hounds, or a hound, carries a torch. Not the sort of goddess you want to mess around with unless you really know what you're doing. And that cult statue has been moved from the sanctuary at Lagina, which has been uncovered by a Turkish team and has now been reassembled, into the heart of the city to the theater, which is overlooking the public places. And there the citizens assembled, and they got 2 denarii apiece. We'll get to that in a moment. That's a sum of money. Summoning by the deme, that is by the districts where people live, by means of placards. So there's apparently these signs that go up, deme A, come up and get your money. And the guys march up and get it. They also served as gymnasiarchs in the city during the 2-day procession, conveying the sacred image of Hecate from her shrine at Lagina, which is known as the Kleidos in the inscription. And then during the feast days, when the cult statue was paraded around the city, the peripoplios, that is, they paid for all of this. In addition, in the same year of the festival, which is dated to about 202 AD, they gave 1,000 denarii, that's the Roman silver coin, for the construction and upkeep of the public bath, whereupon the grandfather of Aristeas, Flavius Aeneas, erected this honorary monument to the city at his own expense. One of the points I must stress is that pagan worship is very expensive, and pagan worship involves a great deal of expense outlay by the elite classes, who are the landed classes, who control the local city government, as well as preside over the festivals. So you don't have a distinct clergy. You have magistrates, local worthies, the social elite doubling, not only as the social elite, but also as the magistrates, the elected officials. They sit on the council, and they serve as priest and priestess. And note, they're usually couples that do it together. The other important thing about that inscription is the amount of money. Remarkably, we have coins of this city in which the name of the magistrate, Aristeas, Claudius Aristeas, appears on the coins, and these are large bronze coins, and my guess is something like 6 coins, big bronze coins. They look like medallions, but they're money, were handed out to each of the citizens as a way of perpetuating the memory of the festival, as well as the donor. And this is a remarkably good coincidence. The importance of these festivals, the distributions, the endowments, is borne out from an inscription that was uncovered at the city of Oinoanda, dated to about 125 AD. And the benefactor is a man named Gaius Flavius Demosthenes, who set up an endowment. This endowment is remarkable. It is set up so that for a 4-week summer festival, everything would be paid for. This would include various entertainment, horse races, chariot games, literary contests, and also tax-free days where all peddlers and merchants can come up and set up markets for. There's actually 3 weeks of just shopping with no taxes. However, it's a religious festival. It involves a procession. It involves everything we described at both Strata Nicaea and Ephesus. But this donor wants to make sure that the distributions are there for the contestants, for the citizens, and everything will go in perpetuity. What is remarkable about this inscription is Oinoanda, which is built on a high point overlooking a very rich plain, is now abandoned. It had a theater that I think, when I was up there, maybe 3,000 to 5,000 citizens could sit in that theater. Overlooking the plain today is the modern Turkish village. When I visited it some years ago, it was so poor and so small, there wasn't even a mosque. And I had to engage a peasant there, an elderly man, to take me up to the site. You have to do this with many cases in Turkey when you're looking at sites. But when I came down, that particular man, I wanted to send him pictures. We didn't have digital cameras at the time. And he had to call over a male relative and dictate his name to write it down because he was, I suspect he was illiterate. That's how poor the current village is. Yet in the Roman age, in 125 AD, it was probably a city of 25,000 at least. So that drives home also the prosperity of the Roman Empire and how so much of that prosperity was put into worship, into public display and processions. So you have the temples, you have the processions, you have the display. You worship the gods, you ask for favors. The worship and prayers are communal. The benefits are communal. However, that doesn't mean that worship was necessarily just a formality or empty. And we have 2 indications of this. First indication is the widespread documentation of what we would call family or ancestor worship, which is evident throughout the Roman world. The ancestors in Latin are known as the maiores, the greater ones. There are ancestral gods such as the lares and penates who guard the household of every Roman house. The herms, who are the protective spirits in the Greek world, well known for those of you familiar with Alcibiades and the charges of mutilating the herms in 415 BC. Funerary monuments abound. They're outside of Athens, they're outside of Rome. Lesser cities across the Roman world literally had what is known as a necropolis, a city of the dead. And there would be sarcophagi and different types of funerary monuments, some of them quite opulent, showing scenes of Dionysus or Heracles, which are very heroic and triumphant. They make very little comment on the expectations of the afterlife, and these monuments seem to be more memorials to the family, the wealth and position of the family. Nonetheless, you find all of these literally cities of the dead around, usually outside the walls, outside the living areas of the city, and virtually public monuments in themselves. That is, they're private memorials to families, but they're regarded as part of the public worship and part of the public monuments. They're usually guarded with curses should you mutilate them in any way. They're also thought of as, you could be fined for mutilating it. If you are in the city of New Orleans, you can appreciate this with the New Orleans cemeteries. It's the same tradition. They're private monuments, but become regarded as part of the public architecture and public traditions of the city. There are a number of spectacular cities in Asia Minor with these freestanding temple tombs and monuments to the ancestors. One of my favorite is in Imbrogian in Turkey today, which is on a major road. There's a number of virtual temples as you're driving on the highway towards the city of Olba, which is what most people visit. And when you get out there, these are simply multi-generational burials in the form of a Greek-style temple in a part of Asia Minor. One of the most remarkable ones is at Pasle, where there's actually a huge phallus carved on the left side of the temple tomb to perpetuate the family, productivity. And again, as I stress, most of these temple tombs are rather disconcerting. They don't talk much about the afterlife or rewards in the next life. They are much more concerned about perpetuating the family, doing what in Greek is eudoxos, appropriate. We should bury the ancestors appropriately. We should appear each year to carry out celebrations to the ancestors. One of those, which was a Roman practice that becomes widespread in the is the Rosalia. That is the placing of roses on a grave. That goes back to the Roman age, and that's very common. This piety is seen in a number of ways in inscriptions. Often inscriptions are set up to make sure that everyone shows up on time and the appropriate dinner is arranged at the temple. And one Roman worthy actually said that all of my slaves, freedmen, and family members can come to the dinner except for the rotten, no good for nothing who never was good in my lifetime, and he should be barred. What a way to be memorialized for eternity. Yet there's something peculiar about this pagan worship. It never developed into the kind of private devotional worship you see in modern Hinduism, because all of this private worship was side by side with the public cults. Another aspect that shows the intensity of pagan worship is the fact that they revere the texts of Homer in Hesiod, who revealed the gods, or early Latin texts. But there isn't any canon. There aren't any authoritative sacred texts. One learns the morality of the gods, the rituals of the gods, from one's birth. It's something you learn socially. It's something that's inculcated everywhere. Polybius, writing in the 2nd century BC, is just stunned at how pious the Romans are, and it's taught at home. So you don't have a Bible, you do not have a Quran, you have a series of religious texts or texts that talk about the gods, but they're not equivalent. Nonetheless, morality and piety are taught. It's just part of the fabric of society. Some historians have gone so far to say that the Greeks and Romans didn't really have a sense of right and wrong, but it's more shame culture, and that's probably going overboard. The Greeks and Romans have a pretty good idea of what is right and what is wrong. Another important point I want to bring up is the issue of syncretism. Syncretism is the idea of assimilating your gods to foreign gods. You see this with the Greeks. They make equivalents between Egyptian gods and Greek gods. You see that with Herodotus. The animal gods of Egypt, they're not really animal gods, they're really attributes, but really were the Greek gods who assumed the disguise when they had been cast out of Olympus fighting the Titans. And syncretism is really premised in many ways on diversity. It's not an incipient monotheism, as some scholars would say. And what happens in the Roman world is natural. The gods of the East are assimilated to Greek gods, and this started with Alexander the Great, and the gods in the West tend to be assimilated with the Roman counterparts. And you saw the same thing with temple construction. That is, Roman and Greek gods are the most powerful, therefore we'll make our local gods versions of the Roman gods. In some instances, the Romans were willing to accept a god that had no equivalent. One of my best examples comes from the city of Antiochia, that is in Turkey today, Antiochia ad Pisidium, a Roman colony, where the god Main, M-E-N, a god who is peculiar to Turkey, Asia Minor, was accepted as a legitimate god. All the other gods of this Roman colony are typical Roman gods, but because of the importance of the sanctuary of Main, he is included as one of the city gods. He appears on the city coins. There is a magnificent sanctuary overlooking the city to the east of it, which was rebuilt in the Roman age. And so you will have cases of the Romans accepting a god like that because the power of Main is powerful. He's a god of the locale. We better include him. And this is a very, very important concept in paganism. That is, pagans will accept a new god if he can prove his power and validity. We'll get to that later on with conversion and Christianity. So besides all of these various gods in the East and West and counterparts and the importance of piety, we should look at one other issue, and that is how all of this worship was sustained. That is, the temples, the processions, the rituals, they cost an enormous amount of money. And as I mentioned, this was sustained by the upper classes. Decurions, or decuriones, to use the Latin term. These would be the members of the community who would collect the taxes, run the city for the benefit of Rome, and they are local elites, and these people essentially paid for the expense of the festivals out of their own pocket. And we have a number of instances of it, not only the inscription I read to you from Strata Nicaea, but others. In Italy and in Rome, the equestrians and the senators, and these represent the two highest aristocratic orders. Ordo, or order, is a legal class, not really a social class. Ordo, ordines in the plural. And the Roman world is categorized by citizenship and rank very, very carefully. So the imperial aristocracy, the city aristocracy, they took on the expense of carrying on the festivals. And then, of course, the Roman emperor himself and members of the imperial family did the same. And in many instances, we find the Roman emperors giving approval to various local gods. In the case of Hadrian, I mentioned that he set up the Panhellenion, to which Adzanis had applied for membership. And the Romans had a very pragmatic view of the gods. By the time of the 1st century AD, all the gods in the Roman world had essentially been enrolled as Roman protectors. Many of the local gods had assumed the quality of Roman gods. We see that at the city of Palmyra, where Arabian gods are decked out in Roman armor. We see this in the way the Roman emperors assiduously worship at different types of sanctuaries. If they're old, they are legitimate, they should be worshipped. And the Romans even have a ceremony known as the evocatio, the summoning out. And this is a ceremony to summon the gods of foes or rebels onto the Roman side, which would then be rewarded with a temple in Rome. That is, you strip the opponents of their supernatural defenders, you make them your own, and then you can take the city, and the Romans always deliver. This is an extremely important concept to drive home. The importance of antiquity, the importance that all cults are legitimate if they have age, if they have tradition behind them. That's why Judaism is legitimate to the Romans. We'll get to that. And above all the gods are able to defend the emperor. They're enrolled as defenders of the emperor, and that means city worship and imperial worship are linked. This raises a question when it comes to dealing with Christians, because Christians not only denied the gods, but as we shall see, they also didn't want to pay veneration to the emperor. And so the Christian denial of both ran counter to the whole religious and social fabric of cities in the Roman world, and also loyalty to the Roman emperor. And that means the Christian movement from the start was on a collision course with not only the pagan gods, but the Roman emperor as well.